Hey everybody, we're Shyam and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio. And we're back after a little bit more exciting Japan GP 2024. Chris, what's up?
Yeah, all is right in the world of Formula One. After Max took a siesta for a week, he's back. Red Bull, dominating. Max dominating.
What's the
It just all
Australian
feels
word
like
for a siesta?
I have no clue, but we'll look that one up. But yeah,
We should
no,
ask Danny Rick.
ask Danny Rick. He's gonna have plenty of time to chat about it maybe next season. But yeah, no, it kind of things turned out the way I sort of expected, getting back on track as Max's car holding together. But it was exciting, at that first turn or the second turn at the start. We had quite a little bit of accident. What are your thoughts on Danny taking out Albon in the on the first lap?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally his fault, right?
Yeah.
So Albon had nowhere to go on the right-hand side. He clipped it into the grass even beforehand to try to. I think Albon probably saw Danny was going to kind of squeeze him close, but then either Danny knew what he was doing and still went with it, which would be a really sad case scenario. But what I think ended up happening was slightly less, malicious. I think he just had no idea that Albon was behind him. But it doesn't really bode well for Danny given his lackluster season so far.
Yeah, for
Regardless
sure.
of whether it was intentional or not, it's just not something that he could have afforded to have had happen. Especially with Liam Lawson standing right behind him in fucking jeans and like street clothes with his arms crossed. Like the cameraman just harped on that for so long. I loved it. It was so great. Like you could feel the discomfort coming off of Danny Ricciardo as he stood there. Again, man, we talked about it last episode. I feel for him, but it really reminds me of the Harvey Dent line. What is it? You either
You either die a
or
hero or
live
live
long
long
enough to
enough to
see yourself become the
see
villain.
yourself become the
Yeah,
villain.
so it's
Yeah.
not as bad as Danny Rick, but it's kind of around along the same lines. I think he's just like sticking a little bit too long for me to keep on empathizing with the guy. Definitely past sympathy at this point. What do you think?
Yeah, he doesn't, he just doesn't seem to be all there mentally. And he's probably in his head a lot because he's like not in that top team. He's in the RB, the AlphaTauri, and thinks he's better and he's pushing too hard. I forget, I need to look up this quote. I should have looked it up prior, but somebody in an interview basically said this guy just needs to stop trying to be perfect and just drive the fucking car. Like, and his accident reminded me of Stroll like 2 years ago, just not seeing people in quali or during the race and just turning into them. It was just completely sloppy. There was room on the left, and Ricardo just made like those kind of mistakes aren't going to sit well with Helmet and Christian. Like you're destroying a car and a race and your future from being sloppy essentially. So
Yeah,
I just don't.
I was listening to the Race F1 podcast, and one of the commentators made he made an observation that I actually didn't really think about too much, and I should have. It was probably really right in front of our face. So he said something to the effect of Danny Ricciardo probably paid too much attention to going straight to RB. Like he didn't even think about this opportunity as a real opportunity. He just thought about it as a stepping stone into RB. And with that mentality, like he never gave this situation or Yuki the appreciation that it deserves, right? Like he went into it being like, all right, this is going to be a stepping stone into Red Bull, and that's all it's going to be. Not knowing that he has just a very formidable, teammate in Yuki who's trying to also get into the Red Bull seat, and nothing is given. And I think he came into it as with the slight mindset of something is, I, I'm owed something. I think that's why it's not really sitting so right with me, right? Of course, he's gonna probably with the performance that he's shown, probably go back and say like, "Oh no, it just wasn't there," like. But I don't think he's ever gonna fess up to the fact that I may have miscalculated kind of my expectations. and kind of floundered it in a way. So yeah, I just don't think he gave it the opportunity, the appreciation that it deserved.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables in Formula One, and he's probably going into it thinking, "Oh, Checo can't get a hold of the car from last year, and my performance is up." Obviously, he had the crash at Zandvoort, so I don't know if that has affected him in any way, but still, it's like Checo's now performing better. Liam came in, showed what he could do. Like, you had to stand out, and I mean really stand out. You need to be consistently beating Yuki week after week in a dominant fashion and not making simple mistakes to get that Red Bull seat. Now, I know like comparing yourself to Max is going to always be impossible. So you're never going to be better than that, but in order to solidify that RB seat, you're going to be have to consistent. And Danny is just not that at the moment. And frankly, I don't think there's anywhere for him to go next year. Um, you know,
Yeah, I think
we've talked about
yeah, I
this.
think the buck stops here with Daniel Ricciardo. So I don't want to beat the horse too much because I think we both stand on similar footing with him at this point. I think
We, not only that, but we both stand on similar footing that we really like the guy, and it's just kind of like
he's kind of
sad,
chipping
but
away at it.
yeah, it's just like, man, really thought this guy's future was going to be like bright. That smile was, infectious, and doing shoeies on the podium, and we who knew that Monza moment would be sort of our last glory moment with
I
Daniel
mean, someone
Ricciardo.
just needs
But
to nut up and tell him to bow out gracefully. Like that. I mean,
yeah,
I would think there's people close enough to him that could be like, "Hey, dude, just bow out gracefully, man." Like, like people will love you more for it. There's a lot of opportunities that are, within the world of F1 that you can tap into, but it's just not racing, and that's okay. Like that's okay. I think like Liam, that's just going to be better racing to see him in that seat, and you're at the end of the day, it's selfish to kind of just keep yourself there and not perform. And if he was performing, man, we would, we talk so highly of Fernando Alonso. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat this over the head too much, but let's go to someone else that I don't mind being the head over.
someone else who needs to leave gracefully.
Yeah, yeah. I think the gracefully part for this person is kind of just long gone, far gone. Logan Sargent comes in last place despite the poor Alpine performance, and at a certain point he was in P11. Chris, uh, there's no excuse for this week, right? I guess another excuse that you could probably put on is, oh, he was working with the repair chassis, and whatever, man. He showed, I guess, like the bit of ceiling that he'd be able to, perform to, and still very low ceiling, and he still ended up finishing dead last out of everyone that finished. So, I mean, I'm gonna pass it off to you, man. Like you already know where I stand, on Logan Sargent, but do you think that this is the last season for him in F1, and would you put money on it? How much money
Yeah,
would
I
you put on it?
mean, I think this is not only the last season. I mean, he might not even make it to the end of the season. Honestly, Williams is having a very rough start to the year, financially and performance wise. There was an interview with James Vowles. Wow, did I say his name right? Yes. Where he was asked, "Your drivers keep on crashing. Why are they crashing so much?" Like, and it's just put him on the spot, and it's like, oh shit, man, just having the worst season ever. And Logan's a big part of that. Obviously, Albon has made a couple of mistakes too, but they can't afford to keep not only not making points but destroying the car and having financial implications of that. It'll just I don't even at some point you have to like take one car out of the race permanently if they're running low on parts. I mean, they put upgrades on Logan's car and then he crashed and ruined those parts and they had to go back to old parts. So at some point it just becomes unsustainable. So I think if Logan continues this trend of not performing, like, listen, he finished the race but he made a silly blunder, went off the track, and if that kind of stuff keeps on happening, I think James has to make the tough decision to say, "Listen, buddy, there's other guys in the weeds, and we have to make a change. It can't be any worse." So,
Honestly, I was good. I was thinking they're gonna stop halfway through the race and tell Alex, like, Alex, get in this kid's car and just like tell Logan to take a hike like halfway through. Be like, hey Logan, get the fuck out.
There was a meme I saw on Reddit that said that showed Albin in the wall at turn two, lap one, or whatever, and it said, "Tell Logan to get my car ready."
I mean, dude, I honestly thought that there was a smidgen of a hope that that would happen, and if that would have happened, I wouldn't have blamed James Vowles at all.
Well, I
Uh,
mean, if it was in the regulations, it probably could have happened, but
I mean, as soon as I saw Albon get clipped, I was like, man, during this red flag, what if they just switched? Like, what if they just, and then I would love to have seen Logan Sargent's reaction to that. But yeah, I mean, at a certain point, he did get up to P11. Say what you will about that, probably because everyone was changing their tires at that same time. But you know, that's the highest that I think he's gotten in any race in the past, like I don't even know, like 15, 20 races. Like so, not a whole lot to work with there.
yeah.
I think James Val's grace is unfortunately going to extend a little bit further than what you projected to, just because other than having Kimi Antonelli come in as a driver at Williams as a stopgap while he goes to Mercedes, but reports are now saying that he might go directly to Mercedes, especially with Alonso saying just the other day that because Aston Martin's in a faster position than Mercedes, that Mercedes just isn't such an appealing look for him. And with speculations that are kind of growing about Carlos Sainz joining Red Bull. Um, and Checo Perez still hasn't had his contract renewal conversation yet. So all of that is indicating to me that Kimi Antonelli is probably going to go directly slot right into the Mercedes seat. Um, Carlos is probably going to slot right into the Red Bull two seat, and then Fernando stays put. So that's kind of what I'm seeing right now, just based on the latest reports, which leaves Williams to stick with Logan unless they're able to find someone else. Let me see who else is kind of in that family of drivers. So you have Mick Schumacher, you have Frederick Vesti that are on the Mercedes reserve drivers end, and then yeah, I guess they also
Who does Pietro? He's an Alpine driver. Fittipaldi.
Fittipaldi, yeah, he's a Haas
Oh, gotcha.
backup. So if Ollie Behrman were to take the Haas seat next year, which he probably is, I think that's going to put Pietro's the next up in their reserve driver. And I don't really know a whole lot about Pietro driving history, but I do know Mick Schumacher, and I think that would be it would be a step ahead or a step forward compared to Logan Sargent, but not by a whole lot. Maybe like a side step and slightly forward. I would be curious to see how Frederick Vesti does. I haven't seen him really drive a whole lot yet. So, they do have some drivers that are kind of like ranked even behind the reserve drivers that could potentially come in. Again, man, I haven't seen some of these drivers drive an F1 car, so I'm not entirely sure how they would perform there. But Williams really isn't in a place where they're getting the best out of Sargent anyway, so might as well go look you know in the reserve bin and see what's there and if something's gonna stick. Because right now you know there's really not a whole lot that you can do with Logan Sargent.
Do you even? I don't even remember how Logan was selected. I mean, I never really heard much rumblings about him. I don't think it's F2
Yeah, he
season.
didn't have a huge F2 like successful career. I think it was good enough. I think the fact that he was an American driver, and remember, it was at that time when the the pool of drivers that they were looking for to fill in certain driver roles were limited because not everyone had super license points, and they
Yep.
were trying to bring in some of those guys from the Indy circuit to come in. I forgot what their names were, but Logan, he cleared the bar and had enough super license points, and I think they had to. help him out a little bit to get the last few right before he was able to get started. So I think just by virtue of that, which is a fucking stupid system, I think also the super license. I get it. I get why they have it to have like at least some sort of a perceived bar that you have to clear, but like how the hell are these guys going to get like points if they're few and far between? Like chances are few and far between, right? So just getting super license points, I don't think is a good indicator of talent that can be transferred to the F1 series. So yeah, I don't know. Just playing some musical chairs there. I think that Kimi Antonelli gets the Mercedes seat going into next year, and then Logan keeps the seat throughout this year, but then gets, I don't know, they probably bring in like Mick Schumacher or someone like that back into it. Or, if Ollie Behrman does take over Kevin Magnussen's spot, I'm sorry, Nico Hulkenberg, because it's reported that Nico's probably going to go to Audi as a German, as a German team, German driver. That'll leave Ollie Behrman to take the Haas seat. um, I don't know if they have an appetite to keep Magnussen there as well, but I don't see why he would move. So yeah, I'm not seeing a whole lot of options for William to choose from. Quite honestly, maybe Dragovic, if he's just like, hey, I'm tired of staying behind Lance Stroll for so long. Like maybe they give, I don't know what the contractual obligations are there, but I feel like
I mean, they have a relationship with Mercedes at the moment
yeah.
with engines, so maybe, maybe they give Toto a call and say, "Hey, we need Dragovich. We can't take Logan anymore." So, I mean, at this point, I think James probably already knows he has to make a tough decision, but he probably doesn't want to rush and make a similar mistake for the future. So,
Yeah,
in
I will say this, Chris. Their safety net, Alex is not doing that great, and I think because he's not doing so great, it's really exposing the Williams like kind of pitfall even more, right? So yeah, I think when Albon's doing well, that unit looks somewhat decent, but then if they're both doing poorly, you know, it's a hard narrative to get to see through a positive light,
I wonder how James is liking his new position as a team principal, and instead of being this like he's very numbers driven and stats driven, and instead of being the guy behind the scenes who's looking at Excel spreadsheets, figuring out the data, the strategy, the decision, and reporting to someone, he's in a very public position now and getting questioned by the media and questioned by other people, interviews, and being scrutinized by F1 other team drivers. I wonder how much he's enjoying all this pressure that is falling on him. He doesn't seem to be. He's always super calm and collected, but he doesn't seem to be enjoying himself sometimes.
I mean, I actually disagree with that. I think if I were to push back, I think he's well equipped for this job. I think like it's the foundation that he's working with that's just
Yeah, for sure.
super crumbly, and this is a test to see. I take this season as a test for James Vowles, not so much for Logan Sargent because he has failed so far, but like I think it's a test for Alex Albon and James Vowles. Like I think they're both kind of in a similar position right now where they have to make lemonade with lemons, and I think James Val has all the fixins to bring a good culture and a winning culture to Williams. They need to find financial backers, man. Like just not having a chassis thing, like it's a little embarrassing too. Like you're an F1 team, you have sponsors. Like why can't you guys find a way to negotiate? Better terms in terms of securing better financing, like what's going on there too leads me to believe, and this is way above my head and above what the camera show us, but if I were to speculate, there probably is a lack of business development that's happening on that front with Williams, and they need to secure that side. I think that's where James might need to also pay a little bit more attention, and that's probably a part of the team principal's job that we're not too privy to. And I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying that he's probably not doing that, but you're seeing what the effects of not having financial security is doing to them. And I think he's the right man for the job. I honestly still believe he's the right man for the job. They need financial security, and they need a better business development strategy.
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, I'll agree with you that he's the right man. In terms of, I think he's kind of like a T in the sense that he's like he understands the car, he understands the strategy, and I think he's really good for the team in that sense. But like you said, the foundations just aren't there, the drivers aren't there. I'm sure they have a an engineering deficit compared to teams like Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull. So hopefully they can fix it up a bit because Williams has a super long history of success in F1, and it would be nice to see sort of like that comeback story
I just don't
from
see
James.
why they don't try to ask for more money from Duracell, and then if Duracell doesn't play ball, you take that contract and you shop it out to Energizer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's just me. Again, I'm sure Ricardo and Sargent will appear again later on in this episode in our brackets, not our winners brackets. So let's look at. Uh, I want to talk about Mercedes. Just a C minus of a season. It's not a failure because they're still technically finishing the races, or at least most of the races. But straight up C minus, gets overtaken by McLaren, Ferrari, and not just Hamilton, but George too. And the straight line speed's just not there. Not competitive at all. I mean, there was a little bit of hope in free practice and in quali, but essentially Hamilton qualified P7, finished P9, and Russ qualified P9, finished P7. So they just flipped and netted to zero. As a Mercedes fan, I'm just going to chalk this whole regulation up to an L, and just live with it and just try to appreciate other parts of the F1 season. But as I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on Mercedes. I feel like McLaren has now solidified themselves as the third team. I think Mercedes. I think the what's left to be seen now is Mercedes or Fernando Alonso. The P4 team, because Mercedes, in my mind right now, is probably going into the P5 zone rather quickly. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little last episode. I think, it's almost pointless for Mercedes to even try next year just because 2026 will be such a huge regulation change that, you know, fixing your car and overdeveloping it to do well next year is just so unlikely. So, like you said, it's kind of a write off for this reg season. And then we already know Lewis is leaving. So you have Antonelli maybe stepping in. But, at most you have George, who's never really led a team on his own because Lewis has always been there. And so we need a season of just getting into shape with George and whoever is going to be riding next to him. So I think this season, the rest of the season is obviously already a loss. Toto never has an expression on his face anymore. We already know Lewis is leaving, so that's kind of written off, and he's prepping for the future. So it's kind of weird the fall from grace, though, considering how competitive they were in 2021 and just how far they fell off the cliff so fast. I don't know if it was their engineers kind of coming and going and losing some talent, but it's kind of astonishing to see. But I'm sure they'll bounce back eventually. It's just like any other sport. You have, one point the Detroit Lions were the worst team ever. Now, they were in the playoffs and stuff like that. So
Oh, you're going to the
uh,
Detroit Lions.
I just it stood out in my mind because I'm not a big American football fan, and I was like, hey, were they in the Super Bowl? Or I can't even remember. I'm ousting myself as an idiot here, but I was
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
thought they were the
It's the
worst team.
attempt that matters.
I was like, I thought that they were the worst team ever. So this kind of stuff happens. Ferrari used to dominate, Schumacher dominated, and then we've been on this like Charles Leclerc sad bear train for so long that maybe next year, and now it looks like it's potentially possible maybe next year. So I think they'll be okay in the long run, but they're going to have some growing pains, and they better hope that they nail it in 2026. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's unless 2026 is a continuation of the ground effects era, in which case they're probably still going to keep dragging their, no pun intended, dragging their feet. Um, let's let's take a look at kind of overall the standings and where they're at, Chris. I'd be curious to kind of hear what your thoughts are in terms of the breakdown as it stands now. So, Red Bull is top of the leaderboards in the Constructors Cup. Ferrari is close behind them. Dennis McLaren, and then I believe it's Aston Martin, and then Mercedes. Even with the double points, I think. Uh, yeah, Fernando Alonso just kind of coming in at P5, and I don't think Lance Stroll. Yeah, Lance Stroll is out of points. So, wait, no, I'm reading that wrong. My mistake, folks. Uh, yeah, Lance Stroll is P12. Sorry, and Fernando at P6. So even with that, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but yeah, Mercedes is 1 point ahead of Aston Martin right now.
Yeah,
Um,
Mercedes has 34 and Aston has 33.
yeah,
Man, it is so depressing
that is
to
tough
see
to see.
Mercedes with 34 points. I know it's only 4 races in, but it's still, it's
And
like,
it's not against Lance Stroll. I'm literally thinking about this as Mercedes versus Fernando fucking Alonso. This is really tough to see. This is making me sad.
kind of, it, it, I told you, like, I didn't like Lewis at first for a little bit, and then he grew on me, especially after what was happening in Abu Dhabi, and then watch him bounce back and the mental strength that he's had. But it's kind of painful to me because I want to see Lewis do well, or at least win a race once in 3 seasons. Um, but I'm happy that George is struggling a little bit. But
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I know.
I just like as far as the standings go. Listen, I've gotten a few new friends into Formula One and have a couple people coming over watching the race regularly now. And it's one of those things where after the crash happened, I was like, yeah, it's going to be exciting because I told them about last year and, the Alpine extravaganza, the double crash into the wall and all that. And I was like, oh man, this could be a really good race and yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, once they got into a formation after the red flag restart, I was like, shit, this is going to be a procession. And I think ultimately, the way the standings are is the way it's just kind of look at the end of the year. Obviously, we could have more reliability issues. Other things could happen. You never know. It's motorsport. But I think we're going to see Red Bull just kind of like 1-2 a lot of the season. Ferrari's going to be close behind. And, McLaren, I think, like you said, has solidified themselves as the de facto P3. So I think the most interesting battle this whole year is going to be where does Carlos Sainz end up and how bad will Ferrari feel at the end of the season for letting this man go? Because he's been Mr. Consistent and driving his freaking head out. And I'm super happy to see it. And I don't know if you saw, but Charles was kind of pissed off at the end of the race. He had to swap spots. Carlos finished ahead of him. And Charles said something like, if you're happy with P4, then what the fuck are you doing in the sport? So he doesn't seem too ecstatic that his teammate keeps beating him
I
when
mean,
he's
do
the
something about it. You know,
do something about it.
like I don't know what else to say. Like, do something about it. Like if you look at the tire strategy for this race, the two winning Red Bulls did medium, medium, hard. The only other driver in the entire race that had the similar tire strategy was Carlos Sainz, medium, medium, hard. Why did they keep Leclerc on that medium for like almost half the race and then let him burn it all the way out just to have like the feeling of being in P1? Like, is that like good enough? Like, if I was Charlotte, I'd be like, yo, bring me in too. Like, give me the double medium, and then the hard treatment as well. Like, I don't understand why I'm out here just to feel like I'm a champ for like 2-3 laps, because like that's the sense that I'm getting, Chris, is like that they're just kind of like placating to Charles Leclerc's ego, and satiating him, but not really fixing the issues. And I don't think Charles is like also doing what Carlos Sainz has proven to be really good at, and that's just pushing back on his team in real time and thinking about shit the way that a real driver should. Not I'm not saying that Charles Leclerc is not a real driver. I know how that comes off, but you're doing great in qualifying. You're getting a couple of laps where you're in P1. I mean, I would want more than that. Like as Charles, I wouldn't wait till the last lap of the race to say something. You know.
Well,
Uh,
I don't even know where Charles was coming from. I mean, like he started the race in P8, and it's like when you have Carlos Sainz and Lando, Sergio, Max, even Fernando, and in a lot of senses Oscar as well, all ahead of you. And sorry, Lewis, you were the other, the only other driver, ahead of Charles in that equation. But I wasn't putting too much hope into you. When you have that stack in front of you, you can't be like upset that you didn't podium. I mean, Max and Sergio are kind of a lock in that scenario, barring any reliability or an accident. And Lando's been consistently podium. Charles has been consistently podium. So if you don't make the podium from P8, you tried what you can, but like it is what it is. Like you did your best, you finished P4, and maybe like the strategy that they chose or he chose to do, you're gonna be on old dead tires at the end of the race, and people who are pitting more often are just gonna be faster than you. Maybe they were hoping for another safety car, another red flag, or something like that, where they could change tires from a higher position. That's always a possibility, but it didn't happen, and you did the best that you could. Sometimes, sometimes these drivers drive me nuts just a little bit. There was a race where it was the race I think where Ferrari went 1-2 and Lando was third, and Charles was in an interview saying like we didn't do our like I could have done better, and it's like
then
your
do
team
it.
finished one
Yeah,
two.
then
Well,
do
your
it.
team finished 1-2. Like, what do you mean you could have done better? That's the literal best result that you can get. Like, other than swapping in your own personal ego. Like, be happy for the team and say, like, we had a great race today. Instead, it seems like he's just like wanting to be Daniel Ricciardo and like I want to be the winner. I want to be the best. I'm number one. I'm owed it, and that's not the way I saw Charles for a long time. So we'll see how it ends up in the long run, and how he ends up sitting next to Lewis Hamilton. Because I think that'll be a really interesting dynamic, especially if there's this butting heads thing going on with Carlos. So
Yeah, I mean, after Lewis had that smirk on his face from watching off track in Australia, like I am so excited to see what that dynamic is going to look like. Maybe it'll challenge Charles to meet to bring his A game every single time. But after what he's been kind of doing with Carlos's recent success, I just don't think I think he's probably gonna. I don't think he's gonna be up for the fight. That's just my hot take. But us talk about kind of like our winners and losers. Let's actually start from the loser side, Chris, since we're already in the Charles Leclerc kind of conversation. So I'm going to put him as a loser this week, pretty much for the exact reason that we just discussed. He is essentially moving forward with the same pitfalls that we've indicated in the past, and a lot of that hinges on the fact that he does not make his own shots. He doesn't call his own shots. He literally just is at the behest of the Ferrari strategist, where and kind of just concedes to Carlos Sainz in a lot of situations. So I think that part is. I hope it's not a permanent thing. I hope it's just a trend that he's kind of going through. But for right now, I feel like that's his kind of that's where he's at as a driver. Mercedes, we talked about. They had a god awful week, I say god awful, and I actually mean it. I don't think it's a euphemism. I think like that is their gold standard. I guess that's their standard now. Is anywhere from P7 to P9, and that's super sad to see. Um, we talked about Albon a little bit. I think Alex just has either by his own fault or through kind of what happened this past week with Danny. Uh, you know, two back-to-back races that he just one where he was under a lot of scrutiny for taking over his partner's car, and another one where he just wasn't able to finish. So I think that compounded with the fact that Williams is just in a tough spot this year, like it is really hurting him. And I don't want to say it's hurting his stock value too. I think it's too early to say that. I think there's still room for him to redeem himself. But if in a world where you're just as good as your last race, and Carlos is kind of proving that, I think Albon's stock has taken a little bit of a hit. And Joe Guan Yu, I think statistically he has the most DNFs out of the entire grid in the past 2-3 years since he's been in F1. I don't know what happened. Do you know what happened to his car, Chris? He just like literally went to the pits and couldn't come back.
He had a gearbox
Yeah.
failure, and that team still baffles me. We could put the pit crew on the losers list as well again. They
They
did
had,
a
they
little
had,
better
they
than
had, they
third.
had a
Third
4 second stop, dude. That was pretty good, apparently,
it,
according to
it was
commentary.
like 4 to 5 seconds, like it's way better than 42 seconds.
That's
But
yeah. As someone that understands time a little bit, that is a true fact. That is a true
yeah.
statement. Is that 4 seconds is better than 45 seconds? It's
But
fact.
listen, Joe's one of those characters. Like, he came in, everyone was sort of, oh, the Chinese driver, like he got in because of money and sponsors. He doesn't really deserve to be there. And then he did okay, right? He like showed us that like he was competing in the first season, not beating Botas, but competing with him and doing well and improving. They seemed to be good teammates, and Botas was helping him improve. And then he proved the second year he was in there, and everyone was like, "Oh, maybe this guy will be something." And then, I don't know whether it's the team, the car, or whatever, but Joe just sort of, I mean, him and Bottas just kind of like fell off the face of the earth in terms of performance. And, obviously their team is going through woes and struggles, but, Joe's another one of those drivers. Like all these drivers have their contracts ending this year, and it's like, do they deserve the seat anymore? Like, obviously, if they bring in a lot of money, that might be a reason that they need to stay. But, once the Audi takeover fully happens, I think it's going to be a bloodbath at that team for drivers and, you know, engineers and pit crew all alike. So,
Yeah.
he's had a bad season so far. Um, Him and Bottas both, but you know, you can't you can't perform well if your car keeps DNFing every race. So,
Yeah, I mean, I see him having a better chance of staying, especially if Audi takes on Nico and kind of appeases the German market a little bit more with that. I can still see Joe staying until they figure out their internal workings a little bit more and have a competitive offering for the grid,
right,
especially if he is bringing in Chinese money. But I just don't see him having a higher ceiling than what he's shown. I think like that's another trend I've been noticing is like what is like the highest ceiling that these guys have shown over a period of 3 years, right? And that is probably going to be the indicator of the highest that they're ever going to be able to achieve. Uh,
right,
there are certain outliers, like a Carlos Sainz, that probably every team he goes to, you're seeing incremental progress, right? And I think I put more money behind a driver like that. I think Albon has, streaks of that, but Zhou Guanyu, you know, Logan Sargent, these guys I feel like are just kind of, Lance Stroll. Like I just they've showed us their cap, so even if we put them in a better car, I don't think they're going to put that car where it needs to be. I think we've seen Checo's ceiling as well, and even though his ceiling isn't as high as a Lewis Hamilton or Carlos Sainz or Max Verstappen, it's high enough, And I don't think these guys have like the Joe Yus of the world have a high enough ceiling. But I saved the worst for last here, Chris. Alpine collectively, again, just a soapbox of a car. Both drivers only finished ahead of our best friend Logan Sargent, and that's just not the company you want to keep. So talk to me about Alpine. Talk to me about what do you think is going to happen to Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly going into next year.
yeah. I don't know. I just That team has a lot of figuring out to do, and they don't have a lot of time to do it. And it was one of those teams that we all thought would be on the up and up, um, and they've done nothing but go backwards. I mean, it's kind of similar to Mercedes, but it's just one of those situations where they have a bunch of new investment money, and they've had a lot of struggles with the leadership, but they have to figure out the how to make all of those things fit together into the puzzle that's going to make them start performing. I mean, no one's going to have unrealistic expectations that they're going to just come in and dominate and start winning every race. But when you go backwards like that, you need to, especially as a team that builds their own engines and should be consistently performing better than they are. I don't know. I just think they need to go back to the drawing board, and I don't have the knowledge of the inner workings on how some of those teams fix these problems, but something definitely needs to happen. And as far as the drivers go, I mean, listen, they're both capable and decent drivers. I would put them above, the Joes or the Logans, and probably still better than, I don't know, Botas, but they're definitely better than like Lance and stuff like that. So maybe they deserve to be in a little bit better of a car, but Alpine should be a good car. That's the problem. Is like they should be a good team, like a top of the midfield kind of team. But I really don't know what the solution is. I don't know whether they just need to go back to the drawing board, but they might not. They might be another Mercedes situation where it's going to be a write off until 26, and hope they nail the regs then. But
If
yeah, we'll see what happens to Ocon and Gasly. I think that they'll stay in F1 at least, one or the other, but they probably shouldn't drive together anymore.
if I were to put on my GM hat for a little while and just kind of see like what can I do, like how can I make lemonade right out of this situation, I would first use that financial backing and of these celebrities, right? Is the team with all the celebrity, finance money coming behind it. I would use that as a way to go poach. Uh, Probably the second line of engineers, probably like at Aston Martin or at Ferrari, right? Because and then kind of poach them that way, right? Like who's not gonna like imagine if you're just like a stellar engineer that has like a great technical mind, because that's what they need right now. They don't need like the hoorah guy. They need the guy like to come like a James Val esque kind of person to come in and literally help them shave off all that goddamn weight on their car and make the aero much more efficient or closer to the other cars on the grid right now. Because right now, dude, their aero is terrible. Like they're
Yep.
it's not even comparable to the worst team like on the grid right now. And so Pierre and Esteban, I think I think we've seen their ceilings as well, right? I don't think they're like yes, Pierre has won a race. I think he does have a decent ceiling, but I don't think he's going to be able to consistently give you the race wins that you're looking for. But if you give him the right car, I think he's going to at least be able to put you in that P3 to like P7 range. Um, so I think if you're, I don't know if Laurent Rossi is still the CEO of the company. I think he stepped out of the F1 role, but I don't know if he still retains like kind of decision making abilities on who the TP is. But I would say go after in this off season or even starting now. Bruno Famine is just not the answer. I think you need to go find someone who's charismatic enough, but more importantly, has a great engineering acumen, and get someone from unfortunately from a Mercedes or a Red Bull or a Ferrari and appeal to them. Be like, hey, these are all of our celebrity backers. Do you want to be in a meeting with them? Do you want to talk about how you could potentially become a TP of a F1? You need to find the diamond in the rough in those instances, right? Because current, I mean, or go, try to convince Mattia Bonato to come back. I don't think Gunther Steiner would be the right person to lead this team as well, because there's just probably too much friction between the French kind of culture that they have and whatever the hell it
Yep.
is that Gunther would bring. But I think like those this role's not appealing to those kinds of guys or a good fit. but it could be super appealing to someone that has been at a unit for a really long time and can be swayed like Mike Crack was, to leave and go start their own project, right? I think that's where their focus should be now, because there's not a whole lot you can do with the car. I'm sorry, there's just not. They don't have it in them to fix that car the way that it is right now for the season. So turn your attention to poaching some of the best, like behind the scenes and technical talent that you can. That's really the that's where I think Alpine could probably, if they were to take their destiny into their own hands, this is where they would probably make the biggest stride, is getting a TP that can get right course their their boat of a car.
Yeah,
Uh,
before the season started, I wanted nothing more than Mattia to go there just because I mean, how can you let a guy like that go? Like a guy who's been in the inner workings of a company like Ferrari for a very long time, led the Ferrari, and maybe he didn't have the results that everybody wanted, but he built one of the best cars. Like the car had reliability issues, and there was a lot of strategy errors in that season. But that Ferrari was a potential championship winning car in terms of raw speed and pace. And Mattia is like was the guy behind all that. He has an engineering mind. He's an engineer, first and foremost. And I would
Yeah,
have
but
taken
but
him.
but, but I think Mattia has settled into a life as, and you can kind of pick up on that in the. I mean, if Red Bull came a calling, if Christian Horner got the boot, then yeah, that might be a very appealing situation to walk into. One that might be once in a lifetime, but this isn't that. I
Yeah,
think
for
like
sure.
the life of being like a wine connoisseur, living in Italy, like, that's you can't beat that, man. Like,
I was about to say
yeah,
it'd be hard to rip me from that life too.
yeah, you
So
just can't beat that unless you literally have a chance to go take on the mantle of the current world champion.
fair enough.
So yeah, that's why I definitely think you aim a little bit younger, and I think the team needs it. I think a younger person for that team is appropriate. I think they that's the celebrity part, right? Like they appeal to a younger crowd, maybe having what I would like to say the Sean McVay of F1 come in there and do some work. But I see you have someone else on your losers bracket, Chris. You want to bring him up?
Yeah, just Lando's had a decent year. He's been podiuming light last year. He also was putting a string together of podiums, and to start P3 and then to finish we start P5. It's just one of those situations where whether it was strategy or whatnot, like he has pace and he's shown that he could podium, and then to sort of like kind of go backwards from there, it's like one of those things where you're like kind of questioning yourself. And he's a confusing driver for me sometimes because at times he has so much pace and he comes from behind and gets on the podium. So I just like watching them go backwards a little bit, and being overtaken by a Ferrari that came from P8, and Carlos who came from behind as well. I mean, I know the Ferrari has a lot of pace, but he's been consistent, be able to get up there in the points. But um, I think there's potential in the McLaren car, and I want to see more fighting um, to get on those podium steps because there really hasn't been a lot of that. So I'm hoping that car gets a little bit more pace. They have a little bit more pace, and we can see some last lap wheel to wheel racing. Um, but
I
just
think
wanted
I
to.
think he tried to put the moves on Charles, like an overtake, and I thought he almost had him. But Charles defended really well. I think it was like probably like lap 30, like late in the late 30s. And I was like, oh shit, like Lando's gonna overtake him. It didn't happen.
Yep.
And I think it was at that point I was like, all right, well he's gonna Charles, unless Charles even went off track for a little while, and I was like, oh shit, is Lando gonna get him there? Just couldn't get to him. And I don't think it's due to pace. I think McLaren has very similar pace to Ferrari in certain racetracks, and although he was about 300ths of a second, 300 300ths of a second away from Charles at the end of the race. But I don't know, man. We talked about killer instincts. We talked about how Charles didn't really have it, but maybe this week he had more of it than Lando did. Um, but you know, let's look at, I guess let's look at Oscar and compare where he. So Oscar,
Oscar
yeah,
started
he started P
P6,
six and then ended P eight.
P8.
Huh. Maybe it was just a an issue with the car. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just an issue with the car because
It could have been just tire deg. I mean, there was a lot of drivers who said that it was pretty hot on the track to start, but then once the clouds rolled in, deg went down. So it's just a lot of timing and luck with tires and
yeah,
deg.
maybe
And
Ferrari was able to capitalize that, and it seems like George was probably able to capitalize. George did overtake Oscar like literally on the last lap, so take that for whatever you will. I guess they were evenly matched in a certain sense. So maybe it was a tire deg that kind of just got McLaren harder than it did Mercedes and Ferrari. But hey, man, also hats off to Fernando Alonso. I think he did as well of a job as he could have. Keeping it clean, but also making sure that he gets into that P6 slot and miles ahead of Lance Stroll.
wasn't there something with Fernando though? Because he told an interviewer to like not talk about it. He's like, they're going to ban me for the rest of the season. I don't know what it was about, but
Yeah, I don't know either, but I mean, I think from what I saw, he kept a pretty clean race this week. Yeah, so
yeah.
I'll let him describe it however he wants to. Um, cool. I feel like that's kind of the story of the grid right now, right? Like
Yeah.
we had some hopes, that there would be some fighting between Ferrari and Red Bull. Obviously, that got shunted real quickly. There was some hope that Mercedes could potentially come in, define themselves as the P3, the de facto P3, which that was shunted to McLaren. I think we have a good idea of where Aston Martin and Mercedes are going to be competing at. So that's something that I think needs to be fleshed out. But top three is going to be Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren. P4 is up to Aston Martin and or more like Fernando Alonso to duke it out with Mercedes. Right after that, I think Haas. Oh, I would say RB, but what I really mean is Yuki Tsunoda. So if we could put him into a team, I think like he's right there. Then I would probably put Haas. I think even though they didn't get points today or this week, Nico came in P11, Kevin came in P13. Not the worst thing in the world. Then I would put. It's tough. What do you think, Chris? Would you, in the shit bucket? Would you put Williams, Stake, Alpine in that order? What order would you put the shit list in?
Yeah, that's a tough one because,
They all seem
you
to be
know,
super shitty together.
Logan brings Williams down, but I still think the average of Albon and Williams
Is better.
is better than the Alpine and the kick pit crew. So
Okay, so
like,
so between Alpine and Kick, who do you think has a better thing going for him?
I mean, I think ultimately Kick's going to end at dead last of the season, just because they have reliability issues, they have pit crew issues, and even on their good
They have an
weekends,
identity issue.
they don't even know, they can't even have their own sponsors appear at each race. So yeah, it's just I think they have too many problems, and ultimately, I think those things will compound and bring them to the back of the grid. But Alpine and Williams won't be much closer. Actually, make for an interesting race at the end of the season. Who can make P8? So, because they're gonna be whoever gets one good weekend is gonna solidify that P8. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
the fight to the bottom is an interesting one nowadays.
Yep.
Cool, Chris. Well, that's all I got. Take us out.
Hold on. We gotta do one more celebration since we talked about him. Yuki scored his first points at his home race in Japan.
Yeah. Did we not talk about Yuki in our winner circle?
we didn't get the winners
Oh,
to
we
start
didn't
of the
get to it.
week.
My apologies. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Let's
You're
wrap
good.
up on the winner circle. So yeah, Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, he's in both of our winner circle. Just absolutely crushed it. And I say absolutely crushed it because, just to your point, first points in his hometown. The Japanese like audience will cheer for anything. It seems like so.
Dude, they
So
went
they
nuts when
went
he
nuts.
overtook.
Yeah, that was really nice to see. Red Bull 1-2, not can't get more precise than that. And they did it handedly without any kind of any real issues. And Carlos Sainz, my boy is just keeping on that good fight and making everyone kind of second guess their decision over there at Ferrari, which what a fucking boss to be able to do that.
I mean, I think the only thing that Carlos would be sad about is losing that Ferrari prestige. But if he ends up at Red Bull, it'll be the one team that he probably would like to go to other than Ferrari. And, I'll be super happy for him. But we'll see. There's so many people we've talked about: Yuki, Liam, Carlos, whoever else could, even Checo. He's definitely performing this year. So we'll see. But, hats off to Yuki scoring those points.
Question: you think Checo would be a good driver for that second Audi? I've been kind
It's
of thinking
potentially.
about it. I've been thinking about it. It would bring some Hulkenberg Checo. That would be a lineup I'd watch
I
in on.
mean, There's one thing I'll say about Checo, and besides him, not being able to handle the Red Bull really that last year, considering how snappy it was, but he's pretty consistent. He's a good driver. He's good on street tracks, and he consistently put cars onto the podium, whether it's a Red Bull or a Racing Point or whatever it is. Like, he's a decent driver. He's just getting up there a little bit in age. But if there's a lot of teams who need a driver who's not going to bend it into the wall over and over and can consistently score points while they figure out their future, I think Chico is a solid pick. So if he doesn't end up re-signing with Red Bull, I definitely think if he wants it, he'll have a seat next year. Either at Audi or wherever he ends up. But if you
Yeah, I think Audi would be in a place where they'd want two experienced drivers that could give them feedback on their car. And I think
Yep.
both Nico and Checo have very similar kind of mannerisms. So I think that would really help reduce the volatility of that team altogether. So I think just kind of us spitballing it made me really think about that being a good fit. But all right, Chris. Unless you have anything else to add, let's wrap it up.
Yep. We have a week off to decompress, and then we're gonna be into actually a really interesting race because we haven't raced in China in a very long time because of COVID, and it's a sprint weekend, so they're only gonna have one practice session before they're thrown into the fire. And it was one of those situations where we've talked a lot about sprint races, and I actually was like, "What is the format this year? I don't even know." So I looked it up, and we're now doing a completely independent sprint qualifying, sprint race, and then regular qualifying, regular race. And I know this was a solution they came up with to sort of, because people were tired of the sprint race resetting the order. But then I was like, this is even just as pointless because I was like, we're just having a mini race for what reason? It just feels so weird. But it is what it is. Maybe it'll be exciting. It gives the fans that were attending in person something exciting to watch. But ultimately, I think we're just going to have a mini version of Sunday on Saturday. So, but
Makes no sense.
it'll it makes no sense. But it's China. Anything could happen here because nobody knows the track. No one's been on it in a long time, and we might see some shenanigans. Hopefully we will. Could be an interesting race, but until then, you know, we'll just have to do something else for 1 week.
Yeah,
But I'm excited for it. But
we'll watch some
well,
MotoGP.
yeah, now owned by Liberty Media.
Just let's go help the maximize shareholder value.
There you go. All right.
Cool.
Well, until then, Cheyenne, it's been lovely talking. We've had a good four races to the start of the season, and it's a little closer than expected because of Max's DNF. So hopefully, fireworks will continue to happen, in 2 weeks' time. Talk to you then.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Shyam and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.